Progressives Congress. Let's talk about the process that actually gave us the 16th president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Of course, we'll have to wait till the 29th of May to see if that happened. I'm joined by a lawyer and public relations expert, Jide Ologun, on the countdown. Thank you for joining us on the program yet again. The last time we spoke was before elections, and now we have the result of the presidential election. But I'd like us to begin with the technology deployed for this election and how it's raised a lot of questions as regards the credibility. Two unique technologies. One is the BVAS, the Bimodal Voter Accreditation System, and the IREV, which is supposed to give real-time upload of results from different polling units. The Electoral Act is clear.
And that means the accreditation will have to be done with the BVAS. And to vote, the presiding officer shall use a smart card reader. We did that a long time ago. Now it's BVAS. And any other technology device that may be prescribed by the commission 4 hours. 4 hours. So again, another discretion. If the commission is satisfied that the result of the election in that polling unit will substantially affect the final result of the whole election and declaration of a pass, on and on, and that the INEC has the power within 7 days to review the declaration and return where the commission determines that the said declaration and return was not made voluntarily or was made contrary to the provisions of the law. So INEC has discretion there. And having said all this, it's saying that a decision of the returning officer under subsection 1 may be reviewed by an election tribunal or court of competent jurisdiction in an election petition proceedings under this act. So now that we have two parties proceeding to the election tribunal and the Court of Appeal has granted leave to have access to the materials with INEC, then the judicial intervention is not ruled out here. And likely so, there had been complaints across the nations where elections took place, and INEC is still subject to judicial interventions, but in the manner of conducting an election, there are questions to answer. But like I've been telling people, if you look at Section 153 of the Nigerian Constitution, 1999, as amended, INEC is the authentic and only umpire that is mandated under the Constitution to conduct an election, which INEC has done. Perhaps the National Assembly, going forward, may sit down to look at the boundaries and the extent of carrying out that mandate. So that is talking about the engagement of technology. So technology has been legitimized during our elections for accrediting voters and for transmission of results. And Bayan, why you even talk about overvoting? By virtue of the new laws we have, what determines overvoting now is the number of accredited voters, not the number of registered voters, as it was under the old law.
Which was the case before the Electoral Act of 2020. So let me just jump in very quickly. INEC also made it clear about the purpose of the IREV, which is for transparency and accountability, and not necessarily for the collation of results at the center. But I think that is that something you will give to the new Electoral Act, or it's just the will of Nigerians to participate in the process?
I think I will commend the will of Nigerians to participate, and participation is one of the core requirements in democracy. I mean, it is the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And for a long time, for years.
It seems we've lost audio with Mr. Ologun. While we're working on that, we probably would just talk more about the national spread of this vote. If we can have the graphic pop up, particularly one of the biggest concerns while the coalition was on was the two-thirds. There are two requirements from the Constitution as to how a president will emerge. You must have one simple majority, and you must also have two-thirds of votes, or at least 25% of votes in two-thirds of the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory. Recall that while the coalition was on, some people started talking about the interpretation of 36 states and the FCT. I'm told that Mr. Ologun is back. Please go ahead with the contribution, Barrister. If you can hear me, Mr. Ologun, you were talking about the will of Nigerians and how that impacted on voter participation in Saturday's election. Well, of course, the issue of the FCT and what that portion of the Constitution meant for this election became, some legal argument online, particularly when some people came up with the idea that cards and the total number of actual voters on election day was only 24.9 million. I mean, we can do the maths and know that we're far away from the 35% that we were even looking forward to do more this time around. But is this a function of reviewing our voter...
Towards the general elections, there were apprehensions of insecurity. So for many, they were not ready to take that risk. And for many, the hardship in the land made them to just come to the conclusion that their vote was not going to count. But I believe now, if you try and evaluate the pattern of results across the country, where some parties expected to clinch their stronghold zones did not, I think many electorates should now begin to believe that their votes count. And this is one of the areas where you need to give it to INEC, despite all the hitches that were experienced in terms of logistics and deployment of electronic materials. And going forward, I think how we can really register our expectations and drive for good governance in the country is coming out. Like Abraham Lincoln, one-time president of the United States of America, said that the ballot is stronger than the bullet. And I'm so impressed, really, by the dimensions of elections. And like you mentioned earlier, we now have the third force, we now have the fourth force, making statements and shaking the election environment. And even though we had 18 candidates for the presidential position, one of them a woman, you found 4 of them really coming out strongly. And I must commend all of them for the zeal they have put into it. And we expect that going forward, maybe at the next general elections, we should have more parties
Indeed.
that would have carried out enough networking across the nation to also be active in gunning for the management of our resources in the country.
Mr. Ologun, recall that we talked about the conditions by which a president can emerge. The second condition talks about at least 25% into a third of the federation. Were you surprised that the issue of the FCT status came up during collation? Was that some political mischief or something we might have to hear from the court for?
It's subject to interpretation. We are going to grant to INEC. And when we fine-tune all this, then we can have the specifics going ahead. But I can let you know that if we begin to define and interpret these 25 of
the comedies, particularly the implication of having our elections, decided by the court. Jide Ologun is a lawyer and public relations expert. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on the countdown today. Well, that's our show today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember that you can be a part of the